May Jesus and Mary be loved by all hearts. As part of the apostolate of the Order of the Mother of God, it's our duty to help people to navigate through the last times, and this includes discernment of true and false prophets. It's a delicate task. Jesus and John the Baptist would argue with the Pharisees face to face on the spot where they could defend themselves or clarify their position. In the internet world, you first have to search and explore whether the person has repeatedly stated an erroneous statement and whether they've retracted or clarified their position in some other podcast or publication. The church has enough problems without well-meaning Catholics bashing well-meaning Catholics. And frankly, I shouldn't have to do this. Every internet platform host should never invite a guest without first vetting that guest carefully. Otherwise, the venue becomes a bullhorn for spreading fake news. We all disrespect secular news channels who have an agenda and spread disinformation. But when someone is reporting on prophetic news, it's a very serious sin. Gossip might be a common venial sin, but it can easily become a mortal sin. Marian News YouTube channel takes this responsibility seriously. I don't release frequent videos because it takes me many hours to do proper research. For the last 2 years, most of my time has been editing important works on La Salette. Over 70 volunteers over the years have helped bring more than 5,000 pages of French into English, and I often have 2 or 3 translators review each other. And then I do the final editing because I am responsible before God for what you will read about this or that holy person and this or that alleged message from heaven. Today, I am beginning a short series of videos on certain persons or platforms who are spreading skewed prophetic messages. They are certainly free to comment on prophecies. We can all speculate on interpretation, but when the premise is wrong, that's unacceptable. Javier Reyes Ayral has irritated me for a long time because of his wildly ignorant, incorrect statements on La Salette. But of course, I've been hampered in offering you a documented rebuttal. Javier brags about his past association with the great Mariologist René Laurentin, so I've had to wait until I could publish an impeccable English translation of Father Laurentin's monumental definitive work on La Salette, which was in French, of course. Finally, I am now in a position to demonstrate to you that Javier has never read Laurentin's book in French or in English. By the end of this video, you will wonder, as I do, if he can read French at all. Is Javier a false prophet? When a person sets himself up as an expert and spokesperson for true prophets, yet misquotes the prophets, putting lies in their mouths, then he has become, in fact, a false prophet. Who is Javier Reyes Ayral? He is not very transparent about his identity on the internet. In one sentence, he thanks his wife Lisa at the front of his latest book. That's all I could find about his family. On LinkedIn, we learned that he has attended a Catholic university in France, not to earn a degree in theology or Mariology, but in business. What brought him to America to settle in the Miami-Fort Lauderdale area? From 2011 to 2021, he worked as general manager for the European aeronautical market. And now he is self-employed, which I interpret as trying to make a living by selling his own books. Everywhere on the internet and in podcast interviews, we are assured that he is a Marian expert and a best-selling author. Let's take that apart. What books has he written? Here is the fruit of my research. In 1998, he published, I'll give you a translation of the French title, A Call to Conversion, Messages from Our Lord and Our Lady to 2 Young Visionaries from Venezuela. This is a 350-page anthology of messages given in the years 1993 to 1998 from Jesus and Mary. Now given in Florida, Venezuela, France, Argentina, Spain, Italy, Peru, Colombia, Israel, the Philippines, Vatican City, Puerto Rico, Portugal, Mexico, Egypt, and Texas, and also some messages given by the Archangel Michael in Louisiana and Florida, and by the Angel of Peace in Peru. Most vendors won't even give you that little synopsis, and it's a translation from the French. So maybe the messages were not given in those countries as if the unnamed visionaries were world travelers, but perhaps they give prophecies concerning those countries. You'd have to buy the book and understand French to learn whether the names of the visionaries are given or left anonymous. Did Javier interview them in person? Does he offer the reader serious reasons for their credibility? Does he ever mention these visionaries or his book in his podcast interviews? If you have any information to that effect or to share, please leave it in the comments. Thank you. That's one book. In 2012, there's another title that shows up with him as the author, but from what I can gather, it seems to concern the same subject as the 1998 French book. In 2013, he published another French book, 578 pages, on the World War II diaries of his famous uncle, Jean Ayrault, a highly decorated officer whose missions were recorded in the annals of the British and French intelligence. Perhaps that put him on the bestseller list in France. So that's two subjects, the messages of rather obscure visionaries and a history book on World War II memos. So how did he become a Marian expert, as his podcasters like to acclaim him? Well, he published one more book in 2022, this time in English, entitled Revelations, the Hidden Secret Messages and Prophecies of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Its 568 pages are loaded with misinformation on La Salette. There are no recommendations on the book jacket. There is no prologue or foreword from some authoritative person. After all, what credible person would recommend this book, this farce? It's a hodgepodge and a jumble in which he weaves false quotes from La Salette and attempts to align them with random prophecies of Marie-Julie Jahenny. It's fantasy. It's a shipwreck. Since he makes so many errors concerning La Salette, which is, of course, my forte, I can only presume that his scholarship on Marie-Julie Jahenny is equally shoddy. It would wear us all out for me to take the book apart line by line, paragraph by paragraph. Instead, I'm going to provide some quotations and screenshots from one very recent interview on Javier's own YouTube channel, O Crux Ave Media. This channel is rather new, June 2024, and this interview was just last week, March 13th, 2025. The interview is entitled Revelations, Part 1, La Salette, a Warning and a Call to Conversion with Javier Reyes Ayrault. I'll put the link in the description box. I'll be focusing on an interview with Monique T. Here is the channel information. Welcome to O Crux Ave Media, where the divine meets the geopolitical, offering unique perspectives inspired by Our Lady at the foot of the cross. There's a medieval Latin hymn in the Divine Office that begins Salve Crux Sancta, Hail Holy Cross, and a 6th century hymn that begins Ave Crux Spes Unica, Hail Cross, Our Only Hope. So it seems the channel's name should have been O Ave Crux, not Crux Ave, which is a clue to the visitor that everything you'll find on this channel is a bit mixed up. And we go on to read, this channel is founded by best-selling author and Marian expert Ave Reyes Ayrault. Marian expert. And how many Marian titles has he penned? And how many books has he sold? Or is he a bestseller on the World War II topic and not on the topic of Marian prophecy? Continuing, and Marian podcaster Monique T. She's too embarrassed to give us her last name and admit that this whole channel is a hoax to sell books. How much is Javier paying her to interview him? I don't know. Continuing, we delve into the profound mysteries of faith and prophecy. We are preparing souls for the challenges of today's world and the end times. really, with botched quotes and inaccurate information? How do you work a math problem when the premise and the data are wrong? Quoting, join our community as we navigate the latest news through the lens of Marian prophecies, debunk misinformation, and rediscover the joy and wonder of our faith. From in-depth geopolitical analyses to spiritual insights, our channel bridges faith and global affairs, providing guidance that enlightens, strengthens, and inspires. Through prayerful reflection and insightful discourse, we unravel how divine providence weaves through the tapestry of history, enabling you to face difficult times with grace, hope, and unwavering trust in God. Subscribe now to be enlightened, empowered, and prepared for the journey ahead. Before you subscribe and let this blind man lead you over the edge into a pit, please stay with me briefly so that I can show you a few significant points that will suffice to convince you that he is a charlatan. YouTube provides the transcript of most audios now, and it's a handy tool. Monique opens with a sales pitch to buy Javier's book. This is the home channel of Javier Herol, who is the author of Revelations, a Marian anthology that is a must for your refuge library. By the way, I have a special video on the Marian News Channel on what Mary really says about refuges. It took Javier 3 years to write this book. It comprises the secrets of the favorite Marian apparition sites, the secrets that we didn't know about because the Vatican hid them from us. I'll address that in a few minutes. Javier worked with the great René Laurentin for 8 years, and he had a chance to well familiarize himself with all these secrets. Note, in the front of his book, Javier is more circumspect. Quote, having for a few years collaborated briefly with Monsignor René Laurentin, Javier Reyes Herol has continued to study apparitions. Collaborated briefly. What did that look like? In Javier's book, A Call to Conversion, he presents messages given in the years 1993 to 1998. About that same time frame, Father Laurentin, now in his 70s, was spending a lot of time in Argentina to ascertain the credibility of the messages to Gladys in the city of San Nicolas. I have a YouTube channel on San Nicolas, and yes, it's been approved. Both authors are French, and both are conversant in Spanish. How and when did they cross paths? Again, if Javier ever gives out some details in his lengthy podcast interviews, please leave information in the comments below. Thank you. So, Monique T. continues, today we start this brand new series on Javier's book, Revelations, and we're starting with the first chapter. Javier says, today is our first part. We're looking at the first chapter of La Salette. The next part is going to be exclusively on the great monarch and the angelic, no, not the angelic pope, that's a different mystic. But today we will talk about Maximin, the little boy in the La Salette story. And Monique says, we're starting this new video series about La Salette, and so Javier, for those who aren't familiar with La Salette, what exactly happened at La Salette in 1846? Can you situate us in the story? When does it take place? Javier begins the story of La Salette with some errors. Quote, all of a sudden, Melanie Calvet, who was one of the two visionaries, a little girl who was not very social, as a matter of fact, as she was taking her father's cows and some friends and neighbors, will agree to ignore, for the most part, Javier's bad grammar because he's only been in the United States since 2011. In fact, I'm not offering you sound bites of the interview because I'm usually cleaning up his grammar and eliminating repetition to make this presentation coherent. First of all, Melanie was a teenager, a few weeks shy of her 14th birthday, not a little girl. Secondly, her father was a stonemason. There is no record that her family owned livestock. Melanie had been hired out from the age of 6 to care for other people's animals in the warm weather and to care for other people's children and barn animals in the winter weather. Melanie always refers to employers as her master, not her father, and her employer at that time was different from the one Maximin was working for. I'll skip ahead because if you are on this Marian News channel, you already know the story of La Salette. The children are on the Alps watching the animals. They entertain themselves by gathering flowers to make a paradise. But listen to what Javier says about the Blessed Virgin. The children fell asleep, and as they wake up, as Melanie wakes up particularly, she can't find her cows anywhere. All of a sudden, she rises somewhat from her lying posture, and in the midst of the sky appears a light brighter than the sun. It was in the shape of a ball that began to flow and float and come at great, great speed from the east all the way to her position a few yards away, a few meters away, and starts to rise and rest ever so softly above the paradise. All of a sudden, from that ball of light, a silhouette of a lady, clearly a lady, to be drawn, and the contours were starting to take color. Where did he get this speeding ball of light? Never in all the books I read on La Salette was there anything of the sort. Here is Melanie's official version, given under the 1879 imprimatur of her holy bishop and reproduced in chapter 4 of Laurenton's work, which we just released in English, under the section, the definitive version of Lecce. That's the diocese that bishop was in. Waking up and not seeing the cows, I called to Maximin as I walked up the little hill. From there, I could see that our cows were grazing peacefully. I was on my way down while Maximin was on his way up, when suddenly I saw a beautiful light shining more brightly than the sun, and I could only just manage to utter, "Maximin, do you see? Over there." Oh, my God. At the same moment, I dropped the stick I was holding. I can't explain all the beautiful things that happened inside of me during that moment, but I felt drawn to the lady with a tremendous respect, full of love, and my heart beat so quickly that I thought it would burst from within me. I kept my eyes firmly fixed on this light, which was motionless. Then, as though it had opened up, I saw another light, much brighter and moving. And in this light, I saw a most beautiful lady sitting on top of our paradise with her head in her hands. This beautiful lady stood up. She partially crossed her arms while looking at us and said to us, "Come forward, my children. Do not be afraid. I am here to announce to you great news." Later in this same document, Melanie takes great pains to describe all she can remember about the lady. We'll focus here on what she says about the light. The sight of the Holy Virgin was itself a perfect paradise. She had within her all that could satisfy, for the earth was forgotten. The Holy Virgin was surrounded by two lights. The first light, closer to the Most Holy Virgin, reached as far as us. It shone with a radiance both beautiful and sparkling. The second light extended a little further around the beautiful lady, and we were situated within that light. It was motionless. That is, it did not shimmer, yet much more brilliant than our poor earthly sun. All this light did not hurt nor tire the eyes in any way. In addition to all those lights, all that splendor, there were also beams of light or rays of light emanating from the body of the Holy Virgin, from her clothes and from everywhere. Melanie was describing three kinds of light in the Blessed Virgin Mary. This is very rich theologically because Our Lady was surely permeated with the distinct grace of each of the three divine persons. Neither Melanie nor Maximin ever spoke of a speeding ball of light that approached from the east and landed on their bed of flowers. Javier continues, Our Lady is crying, and she is wearing a very different outfit, and her hair is not a traditional coiffure, as we call it in French, and instead of the usual veil, with what appeared to be a crown, and her dress was also somewhat different. In the interview, about the 15-minute mark, Javier directs Monique to search for and click on a particular image of the Blessed Mother, which he believes is accurate, but it's totally wrong headdress. The sketch that I'm showing on the screen now bears the signatures of both children who declared that it was the most accurate that any artist had produced. Mary was not wearing a crown, but rather a very high headdress, adorned with flowers, and from which emanated rays of light. The flowers kept changing colors before the children's eyes. None of her hair was visible. She was proportionately taller than even a tall person. She was wearing a white tunic and a yellow pinafore, similar to what the country women were wearing, but her headdress was much more impressive. If Javier had read in French the work published by Laurentin in 2001 and the description in French that had been published by Melanie's bishop and republished hundreds of times since 1879, he would not rely on that fanciful holy card made by some ignorant artist. In the interview about the 1721-minute mark, Javier says, the chains on her shoulders are considered to be, according to Father Laurentin, the chains of sins, which make humanity enslaved to the sin of the world. But Laurentin says something totally different in Découverte, his book. Quote, the chains hanging on her shoulders remind us of the precepts of wisdom. This unusual symbol calls for the attention of Christians and theologians, like the Proverbs of the Old Testament. Cast not away wisdom's counsel. Put your feet into her fetters and your neck into her chains. That's Sirach or Ecclesiastes 6:24 and 25. And quoting also, he quotes St. Francis de Sales, oh my God, what happens and what glory to be bound to you by the chains of love and to burn by the same fire of love and the same furnace as yourself. When will we have hearts consumed in your love, etc. I'm not denying that Laurentin said the other thing, but it's interesting that he didn't mention the chains of sin in his definitive work, Découverte. Now, about Grenoble. I've often asked myself if Javier really knows French or if his accent is really Spanish. Perhaps he did not get his business degree at the Paris Institute. Have we ever seen the certificate? Over and over again, in his books and in his conversation, Javier mistakes the French word abbé for abbot. Certainly the root for both is father, but an abbé is a parish priest, usually an associate to a curé, who is the pastor. An abbot is a superior of a monastic community. It's incomprehensible to me how Javier and his publishing editor identify every priest as an abbot, except René Laurentin, who is a Monsignor. Likewise, Javier doesn't understand that there is a difference between a diocese and an archdiocese, a bishop and an archbishop. He adds arch to every bishop and identifies Grenoble as an archdiocese. This is the town in whose jurisdiction La Salette fell. In fact, Grenoble is so far from having the status of archdiocese that in 2006 it was merged with the Diocese of Vienne. So now it's the Diocese of Grenoble-Vienne. So wouldn't any French Catholic who was seriously practicing his faith know that? How many American Catholics would assume that a modest-sized town would be the seat of an archdiocese and an archbishop? And what about Javier calling Maximin Maxi? I'm showing on the screen a page from his book, Revelations. After Our Lady of La Salette ascends to heaven, the children stand amazed, and Melanie says cryptically, not to give away her long years of an extraordinary mystical life, oh, Maxi, that must have been my father's good Lord, or the Holy Virgin, or some other great saint. I've examined over 5,000 pages on La Salette material, probably more than 8,000, and nobody ever calls Maximin Maxi. His nickname is Memon. The 1879 text says in our English translation, Memon, that must have been my father's good Lord, or the Holy Virgin, or some other great saint. And Maximin threw his arms into the air and said, oh, if only I'd known. In Melanie's biography, we learned that as a very small child, she called holy objects good Lord because her father referred to the crucifix on the wall of their home with that expression. The 11-year-old Maximin understood very little of this vision until his spiritual life developed later. In fact, he never saw Our Lady's face, only a great light, something similar to Francisco of Fatima, who never heard Our Lady's voice. But this isn't a commentary on La Salette, but on Javier. But those grammar errors are minute compared to the whopper he tells about an iron box. In the interview, starting about the 20:05 minutes, he says the apparition had been formally recognized by the Archdiocese of Grenoble in 1851 and confirmed and approved by the decree of the doctrine of the faith. Yes, in 1851, Pope Pius IX read the secrets and encouraged Bishop de Bouillard to use his authority as Bishop of Grenoble to grant formal approval of the apparition. But this never involved a decree touching upon the doctrine of the faith. Catholics are free to ignore even large apparition sites with their own liturgies and canonize visionaries like Lourdes and Fatima. Private revelation is for our edification, not our sanctification. Javier Herrera Reyes is no theologian. At the 22-minute mark, he continues, the Archbishop of Grenoble placed the secrets of La Salette in an iron box and laced it with the little ficelle, perhaps that's a French expression to tie something into a bow or a knot, and placed the seal of the Archbishop of Grenoble and ordered it to be sent so as to be lost in the depths of the Vatican Library, never to be found again, quote, unquote. So that was in 1851, and this metal box was deliberately sent to Rome to be hidden in the messy archives of the Vatican Library amid thousands of uncatalogued, mostly handwritten documents. Really? Then what do we make of the well-known fact that Pius IX kept the secrets in his nightstand where he could meditate on them frequently for the rest of his life? And what do we make of the successor of Pius IX, Leo XIII, who enthusiastically studied them a few months after his election as Pope and invited Melanie to meet with him to discuss how they could initiate the Order of the Mother of God? And how is the Frenchman ignorant of the most famous biography of Melanie, La Vie de Sœur Marie de la Croix, Bergère de la Salette, by Abbé Gouin, published in 1970 and translated immediately into half a dozen European languages? Javier should be way ahead of us poor Americans in his knowledge of La Salette, with hundreds of documents in French and very few in English. And again, there is the problem of the iron box. What do we do with the account that Father Courteville related to Father Laurentin and is published at the beginning of their 2002 book? I will show you that there is no iron box, only bundles and folders. At 2100 minutes, Javier says, Father Courteville discovered it, that is the box, by accident in 1999 in the same library of the Vatican. In other words, he found it almost 50 years later. 50 years? Javier told us that it had been deliberately hidden in 1851. That's 150 years, not 50. And immediately, as you can imagine, when the good priest discovered it, and by the way, Father Courteville was the assistant of Father René Laurentin, with whom I had the immense privilege to work for 8 years, I remember a brief anecdote. Let's interrupt. Father Courteville was a French priest ordained as a missionary for the African country of Ivory Coast. It was only after Courteville discovered the documents while in Rome for the summer working on his doctoral thesis that he decided that the discovery of the secrets of La Salette should be published as a book under the authorship of this renowned Mariologist, so that it would be given the importance it deserved. While editing his 2-volume thesis, because we are preparing the translation, it's easy to see the great difference in writing styles. Découverte is primarily the work of Laurentin, so it's quite plausible that Father Courteville obtained his whereabouts and was able to telephone Laurentin in Argentina. I spent a couple of months with Father in France. This priest is a polyglot and probably a borderline genius. The secrets were not in an iron box, and it was not found by accident. Let's read the interview printed at the head of the book Découverte. Father Laurentin conducted this almost immediately after the discovery so that Father Courteville would be acknowledged and no one else could claim to be the first to see the documents among the papers of Leo XIII. So I'm showing you on the screen screenshots of the book itself, which is now available in English. So RL, that's René Laurentin. When and how did you discover the secrets? Michel Courteville, I learned at the Vatican archives, certain items I was researching have been transferred to the Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. These archives were open as far back as the end of the pontificate of Leo XIII, 1903. I asked what steps to follow. That was in July, and they told me to return in September. A letter from my thesis advisor justified my research to Cardinal Ratzinger, because he was the prefect of the congregation at that time. That was the only Ratzinger connection. The additional support of a Roman theologian opened the doors for me of the consultation room, but only after waiting 3 weeks in one place. It took me about 10 days to explore the depths of the archives of the Sacred Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, formerly the Sacred Congregation of the Index, or of the Inquisition, etc., about questions relating to the apparition, and I made some discoveries. But the principal file of La Salette was not appearing, and for a reason. The catalog of that section no longer existed. Finally, the archivist indicated from memory the location of that document, providentially classified in the years 1879 to 1883, and I began to dust off some bundles, not iron boxes, which hadn't been open for 10 or 20 years. On Saturday, October 2nd, 1999, Feast of the Guardian Angels, travel being less congested on the weekend, I arrived promptly at the Vatican. The idea came to me to go and pray before the place of the Confession of St. Peter under the main altar of the Basilica, and to promise something, if I should by chance find a trace of the secrets. We learn a few pages later that this promise involved the sacrifice of drinking wine. I leafed through the stacks of papers all morning. The edges of some folders were falling to pieces. Right in the middle of the last bundle, at the moment the closing bell was sounding, I perceived on a paper with blue lettering what seemed to be the handwriting of Melanie. I only had time to read under the date July 6, 1851, several prophetic statements. The secrets were discovered. Not hidden, but filed with the pontificate of Leo XIII, which was not yet cataloged. How could Javier not know all this? Americans had to wait until the summer of 2024 and the generosity and helpers of translators to read this in English. The French have had the book since 2002, but Javier goes on with the crazy tales. Father Courteville got permission from the prefect of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, Cardinal Ratzinger, the future Pope Benedict XVI, to get an imprimatur and to publish the secrets. What? Ratzinger did not give the imprimatur. Here is the English translation as we published it in 2024. So this is the translation of the 2002 book. The Nihil Obstat was from Abbé Notre Dame de Tournai, February 13, 2002, which was the anniversary of Marguerite Aron in Auschwitz, a devoted research assistant on Melanie. And it was given by Dom Bernard Billet, OSB. But the imprimatur was given in Évry-Corbel-Essonnes in France on the Solemnity of the Resurrection, Easter Sunday, March 31st, 2002, by Bishop Michel Dubost, CIM. He was a Congregation of Jesus and Mary. Now on April 19, 2018, quite a few years later, as retired bishop, he was appointed National Director of the Pontifical Mission Societies in France for a 5-year term. I did a bit of sleuthing on Bishop Dubost. Who was he, and why did Father Courteville approach him for an imprimatur? His own bishop in Ivory Coast probably didn't read French as a first language, and we can assume that he was no expert in La Salette. Bishop Dubost was a native Frenchman, an abbot, and possibly connected with the Benedictine Abbey of Salem, which did so much to help Father Guan collect documents on Melanie and La Salette. Bishop Dubost was a missionary and spent time in Africa, so the two French priests probably developed a friendship. That's all guesswork on my part, but the main point is that Cardinal Ratzinger did not give the imprimatur. Now at the 23 minute mark, Javier goes on with this craziness. Courteville brought it, that's the iron box, to Cardinal Ratzinger, and since then it's been propagated all over the world in every language known to man. What? It took me years to get this massive book into English. I've been told that parts of it are in Polish, but I haven't seen the discovery in any language but French, and certainly not in every language known to man. Javier hammers down, and it even was said that it was Pope John Paul II's favorite night reading. It was always a copy of the Discovery of the Secret of La Salette, written by Father Courteville and Father René Laurentin. Découverte was published in French in 2002. By that time, Pope John Paul II had advanced Parkinson's. I love St. John Paul II. I would love to see some documentation on this pious rumor about it being the Pope's bedtime reading. Do you trust the wild imagination of Javier Eyrol Reyes? Have you had enough? Do you think there is any scholarship in this book of his revelations? Do you trust anything Javier Eyrol Reyes might relate about Marie-Julie Jahenny? Since he doesn't know the facts about La Salette, how can he make connections to other French prophecies? Please refrain from clickbait videos. You just incentivize these channels and you help to spread gossip. You've been warned. You will have to answer to God. God bless you.